May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable unto you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. The day is not far distant when the man who dies leaving behind his millions of available wealth, which was free for him to administer during life, will pass away unwept, unhonored, and unsung, no matter to what uses he leave the dross which he cannot take with him. Of such as these, the public verdict will then be, the man who dies thus rich dies disgraced. Such, in my opinion, is the true gospel concerning wealth, obedient to which is destined to someday solve the problem of the rich and the poor. American industrialist Andrew Carnegie penned these words in 1889 in an article called The Gospel of Wealth. Carnegie was himself, of course, one of the wealthiest men in America at the time, remembered alongside such names as Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Ford, and J.P. Morgan as the industrial and financial titans of the Gilded Age. The principles of the Gospel of Wealth emphasize that the richest members of society have a moral obligation to use their wealth for the benefit of all, and to do so in their lifetime. Carnegie was vehemently opposed to the practice of hoarding wealth for personal pleasure or to pass down as inheritance, and believed that the rich should live lives of modesty. To Carnegie's credit, he did live out this philosophy in some significant ways. He built schools, including what would become Carnegie Mellon University, and created a pension fund for teachers. He built Carnegie Hall, the Peace Palace at The Hague, and nearly 3,000 public libraries, and dozens of Carnegie endowments live on to fund other philanthropic efforts. While rather novel at the time, the Gospel of Wealth was not a new idea. It derived from a much older, paternalistic concept known as noblesse oblige, a French term meaning nobility obliges. This is the notion that entitlement naturally comes with a commensurate degree of obligation to those with less. Today, we sometimes hear this referred to as the Peter Parker principle. With great power comes great responsibility. In direct contrast to noblesse oblige is another French term much more familiar to modern audiences, laissez-faire, which means let them do. It is the notion that you are entitled to whatever you can take, and that no obligation, moral or otherwise, constrains that entitlement. As the gulf between the richest members of our society and the poorest grows to its highest levels since the Gilded Age, we see precious little sense of obligation among our modern tycoons. Instead, we see them taking vanity trips to outer space or the ocean depths. We see them buying islands and yachts. We see them spending money and resources to build a white nationalist artificial intelligence that praises Hitler. We see them building $200 million ballrooms instead of hospitals or schools. So is the Gospel of Wealth the antidote to this? Not quite. For all his philanthropy, the fortune that Andrew Carnegie amassed was built on the backs of workers whom he brutally overworked and grossly underpaid. Just 3 years after publishing the Gospel of Wealth, he was responsible for the violent suppression of a strike at one of his steel plants in Homestead, Pennsylvania. And that is why the gospel of wealth did not, quote, solve the problem of the rich and poor. Because for all its virtues, it was simply another mechanism to enforce the status quo. It was a virtue signal that rang hollow to thousands of workers who toiled their lives for next to nothing, who never had a day off to visit the Carnegie Library. Jesus speaks a great deal about money in the Gospels. But today's parable of the rich fool is a little bit more perplexing in our modern cultural context than, say, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus says, "The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, 'What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, 'I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.'" Let me ask something. Who here has or has ever had a retirement account? Yeah. You put money in, your employer puts money in, and then you have money set aside for those later years to relax, eat, drink, and be merry. And what business person, upon seeing the successful growth of their business, would not seek to grow and expand that business into an even more profitable venture? None of these things on their face seem insidious or foolish. They seem like common sense. They seem true. Now I'd like you to do something else. I'd like to invite you to quietly read over this gospel passage again and count how many times in the parable, that the rich man uses I or my when he is doing his thinking. I'll give you a moment. Does anyone have a count? 11. 11 times in 3 sentences. 11 times that the rich man ponders about himself and his own well-being. No other person enters his thoughts but himself. Not his neighbors, not his workers, not his family or friends, not God. In 2017, the American photojournalist Lauren Greenfield published a collection of photos entitled Generation Wealth. In it, she examines 25 years of cultural shift that has changed how millennials and Gen Z in particular view wealth. She shares how in previous generations, Americans used to look at their successful friends and neighbors and aspire to their achievements. But over the past 25 years, reality TV and social media have inundated us with the glamorous lives of the rich and famous. And for many, achieving that life has become the goal. A survey conducted in 2023 found that 43% of Gen Z and 41% of millennials surveyed found themselves obsessed with the idea of becoming rich. In her introduction for Generation Wealth, Greenfield writes, "We now live in a society where our highest public servant is a real estate developer and reality TV star who lives in a penthouse on the 66th floor, emblazoned with his name, and decorated in a Louis XIV style, with ceilings painted with 24-karat gold, marble walls, and Corinthian columns. What we don't see often enough, or clearly enough, is everything that wealth destroys. Our relationships, our communities, our environment, ourselves. Let me be clear, you cannot amass great wealth without hurting someone in some way to do it. And when you hurt someone for personal gain once, it becomes easier to do it again. People and principles become obstacles. And it doesn't matter how many libraries bear your name, because you've become a person who hurts people to get ahead. Yesterday I had the honor to celebrate the life and accomplishments of our dear sister Doris. After the service, as I looked at the display of memories from her life and heard the stories of her friends and family and loved ones, I was struck with a sense of awe. It wasn't the multitude of different things she did in her life that stuck with me, though that was certainly impressive. It was how every gift and talent that she had went toward enriching someone else's life in some way. She touched generations of people in a way that the trappings of material wealth could never do. In our passage from Ecclesiastes, we read this rather bleak existential assessment of the sum of human life. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Vanity is not just the characteristic of having excessive pride in oneself. It is also a word for futility and worthlessness. And it derives from the Latin word vanus, empty. That is what life is when we live it for our personal enrichment. It is empty. There are times in our lives when we need to stop and take stock of what we're doing it all for. What makes it worthwhile? That can be a scary exercise. We may find ourselves anxious that we don't have it all figured out, or that maybe we've been living for ourselves more than we ought. But that self-reflection is a gift. It's a precious opportunity to examine those spaces within ourselves that we do find empty, and to fill them with treasures that endure.